They say the ocean never forgets. It keeps what it takes: the ships, the souls, the stories that never reach the shore. For Captain Mira Solen, the sea isn't just water and wind. It's memory. Every lantern drifting through the fog feels like a heartbeat, faint but still alive. And as she sails deeper into the mist, the whispers grow louder, voices calling from beneath the waves. What if the ones we've lost never truly left? They just learned how to speak through the sea. And so begins the voyage into the unknown, the sea of lost voices.
The lantern seas stretched endlessly beneath the twilight sky, a vast ocean scattered with drifting islands that flickered and shimmered like stars fallen to the water. I had known these seas all my life, the gentle sway of the lantern islands, the whispered songs of the tides, the salty air that clung to my skin like an old friend. Fishing was my livelihood, my rhythm, and my solace. But on that evening, as the sun slipped beneath the horizon, and the first stars kindled in the darkening sky, everything changed. I stood at the prow of my small boat, the woven nets coiled and ready, eyes scanning the familiar silhouettes of the lantern islands that floated lazily around me. The sea was calm, a glassy mirror reflecting the fading light. Yet, beyond the usual glow of the islands, something new drew my gaze, a distant light, pulsing and strange, unlike any lantern I had ever seen. It was faint at first, a flicker among the drifting constellations, but it grew steadily, a heartbeat of eerie, ancient brilliance. Curiosity tugged at me, a silent summons woven into the wind. I adjusted my course, steering toward the glow. As I neared, the air thickened with a quiet power, the usual chorus of waves and seabirds fading into a heavy silence. The island before me was unlike the others. Its surface shimmered with lanterns that flickered in colors I couldn't name, shifting between warm gold and cold blue, light and shadow entwined in a delicate dance. I stepped onto the island's shore, the sand cool beneath my feet despite the lingering warmth of the day. The lanterns around me hummed softly, their light pulsing in rhythm with something ancient and alive. As my eyes adjusted, I caught sight of figures within the island's glowing core, shapes, not quite human, shifting forms woven of light and shadow. They spoke without moving their lips, voices carried on the tide and wind, whispering secrets older than memory. "Guide us," they pleaded, voices like the rustle of waves and the sigh of the breeze. "Beyond these seas lies a world that fears us, but we cannot journey alone." Fear gripped me, cold and sharp, yet beneath it stirred a fierce awe. These were the gods of old, beings I had only heard of in whispered legends told by my grandmother. They were real, imprisoned within this drifting lantern island, bound by ancient tides and forgotten time. I hesitated, the weight of their plea heavy in my chest. To accept meant stepping into a world I did not understand, to become a guide for forces that could unravel everything I held dear. Yet the pull was undeniable, an unspoken promise of purpose beyond the nets and tides. That night, beneath lantern-lit skies that flickered with both hope and shadow, I made my choice. I would guide them. I would face the unknown. The sea whispered around me, carrying the echoes of ancient light, and the beginning of a journey that would change the lantern seas forever. The glow on the horizon had seemed a distant heartbeat at first, a faint pulse against the vastness of the ocean. But as I sailed closer, the light grew stronger, wrapping itself around me like a living thing. The air thickened, charged with an energy that set my skin tingling and my heart racing. I slowed my boat, letting the familiar rhythm of the waves give way to a stillness so profound it felt sacred. The island came into view, a drifting lantern island unlike any I had ever encountered. Its surface was alive with shimmering lanterns, flickering in hues that danced between warm gold and ethereal blue. The light was not steady but seemed to breathe, ebbing and flowing like the tides themselves. I stepped onto the shore, the sand cool and fine beneath my feet, and immediately felt the weight of the silence. Around me, the lanterns hummed softly, their glow casting long shadows that swayed with the gentle breeze. Then I saw them figures within the island's glowing heart. Their forms were fluid, shifting between light and shadow, neither fully solid nor entirely ethereal. They spoke in voices that seemed woven from the sea and the sky, ancient and haunting. Mira, they called, their voices a chorus of wind and water. We have waited long, bound by tides and time. Guide us beyond these seas, for the world fears what it does not understand. The name on their lips startled me, as if the sea itself had whispered it. I swallowed hard, my mind racing with fear and wonder. These were the gods of old, the forgotten powers that had shaped the lantern seas before memory. Their imprisonment was a secret kept by time, now revealed to me. I retreated to the shore, my hands trembling as I lit a small lantern I always carried. The light flickered, casting a warm glow that felt fragile against the vast darkness. I thought of my family, my home, the simple life I had known. Yet beneath the fear was a growing resolve, a fierce determination to understand and protect this fragile world. I will guide you, I whispered into the night, the words a promise and a curse. The gods' light pulsed brighter, as if accepting my vow, and the sea around us seemed to breathe with new life. That night, beneath the drifting lantern-lit skies, I felt the weight of ancient secrets and the stirring of a destiny far greater than I could have imagined. The lantern seas would never be the same, and neither would I. I spent the hours after our encounter sitting on the shore, watching the lanterns flicker against the velvet night. The imprisoned gods remained silent now, their light gentle and watchful. The sea stretched before me, vast and unknowable, a mirror of the sky's endless expanse. Fear and awe battled within me. What had I agreed to? To guide lost divinities through a world that might reject them, to bear the burden of secrets that could shatter lives. Yet in that fear was a spark of something else, a fierce hope that perhaps I could be the bridge between light and shadow. As the night deepened, I traced the lanterns with my fingers, feeling the warmth and the pulse of magic beneath their glow. The sea whispered its quiet song, a reminder that life, like the drifting islands, was impermanent and ever-changing. With a steadying breath, I rose. The path ahead was uncertain, shadowed by doubt and danger. But I was no longer just a fisherwoman. I was a guide, a keeper of light and darkness. And the lantern seas awaited. The journey had begun. The sun had barely dipped below the horizon when I returned to our island, the familiar scent of salt and damp wood greeting me like an old friend. Lanterns bobbed gently on the water, their golden light weaving through the dusk like fireflies caught in a slow dance. Nira was waiting by the dock, her face flushed from the breeze and salt air, her eyes wide with a mixture of relief and curiosity. "You read back," she said softly, stepping closer, "and you look changed." I pulled my cloak tighter against the brisk evening and nodded, hesitant. "There's something I need to tell you, Nira. Something I found out on the sea, something I never believed until now." She gestured toward the fire pit nearby, where dry driftwood crackled invitingly. We settled close to the flames, the flickering light casting long shadows that danced across our faces. I told her about the island glowing with an ancient light, the imprisoned gods hidden within its core, and the plea they made for guidance beyond the seas. Nira listened in stunned silence, her fingers absently tracing the grain of a driftwood lantern beside her. "Gods," she whispered, disbelief threading through her voice. "But that's just old stories, Mira, legends to keep us wary of the deep." "That's what I thought," I admitted, "but what I saw, it was real. They were trapped, and they need me." Nira's eyes searched mine, her warmth steadying the tremor in my chest. "Then we'll face it together. You're not alone in this." Her loyalty was a balm, but my heart churned with doubt as I made my way to Ilan's hut. Nestled beneath ancient lantern trees whose bioluminescent leaves shimmered faintly in the growing dark. The elder seer welcomed me with a knowing smile, her silver hair spilling over her shoulders like a cascade of moonlight. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of herbs and salt, lanterns hanging from every beam casting soft pools of light. Ilan guided me to a worn wooden table, where parchments covered in faded symbols lay scattered like fallen stars. "You carry a heavy burden, Mira," she said gently, tracing a delicate finger over a map of the seas dotted with drifting islands. "The gods you found are bound not just by chains, but by the fragile balance we've maintained for generations." I leaned in, drinking in her words. "Tell me everything." Ilan's voice wove through the room, a tapestry of ancient history and sacred lore. She spoke of the gods' dominion over the tides, their exile born from a betrayal that fractured the harmony of the lantern seas. She described the delicate dance between light and shadow, and how the lantern islands themselves were vessels of that balance. "Their imprisonment keeps the peace," she said, eyes meeting mine with quiet gravity. "But their return could tip the scales either toward renewal or ruin." The weight of her revelation settled over me like the evening mist. I realized the path ahead was not just mine to walk, it was a crossroads for all who called these drifting isles home. That night, word of the gods' return spread like wildfire. The island's council gathered beneath the towering lanterns, their faces etched with worry and fear. Kale, the young warrior known for his fierce loyalty and quick temper, stood among them, his gaze sharp as the blade at his side. "This is madness," he declared, voice cutting through the murmurs. "Bringing the gods back will only bring destruction. We should exile them again, or burn their prisons to ash." Gasps rippled through the crowd. I stepped forward, steadying my voice. "Cal, I understand your fear. But these gods are not the monsters we've been told. They need guidance, not chains," he sneered, folding his arms. "And what if you were wrong? What if they bring the storm that drowns us all?" The tension was a living thing, thick and suffocating. I felt the eyes of my neighbors, friends, and family weighing me down. Doubt gnawed at my resolve. Later, beneath the quiet canopy of stars, I walked alone to the water's edge. Lanterns floated serenely on the waves, their light soft and steady against the vast darkness. The sea whispered its endless song, a reminder of the world's indifferent flow. I closed my eyes and let the salt air fill my lungs, drawing strength from the rhythm of the tides. This was no longer just my story, it was the story of everything that drifted and glowed in the lantern seas. With a deep breath, I made my silent vow to protect the fragile balance, to guide the lost divinities, and to face the fears that threatened to engulf us all. The journey had only just begun, and the light of the lanterns would be my compass through the encroaching night. As the first light of dawn brushed the horizon, I turned back toward the island, ready to meet whatever the day and the gods would bring. The twilight air was thick with salt, and the faint glow of bioluminescent plankton that traced the wake of Mira's small boat as she approached the mysterious lantern island once more. The sea rippled gently beneath her, a rhythm both familiar and strangely altered, as if the tides themselves whispered secrets she had yet to grasp. Her eyes, sharp from years of reading the skies and currents, caught the island's eerie luminance, not the warm, comforting light of other lantern islands, but a pale, almost spectral glow that pulsed with a slow, steady heartbeat. Stepping onto the island's surface, Mira felt the delicate hum of ancient magic beneath her feet. The lantern island was unlike any she had known. Its core held imprisoned shapes of shimmering light and drifting shadow. The gods she had met before now revealed themselves more fully, their forms flickering between solid and ethereal, faces etched with sorrow and longing. Their voices rose in a chorus that blended with the whispering winds, weaving the tale of a dominion long lost. They spoke of times when their light ruled the lantern seas, guiding tides and weather, nurturing the islands that floated like stars across the ocean's vast canvas. But their reign was shattered by betrayal, a fracture in the divine order that cast them into imprisonment, bound by ancient magic and forgotten oaths. The gods' lament was not just for their own loss, but for the fragile balance that had once held the world in harmony. Mira listened, her heart tightening with the gravity of their story. The gods were not merely beings of light. They bore shadows within them, echoes of pain and anger that mirrored her own fears. Among them, the name Daegis stirred unease, a god once protector, now corrupted by bitterness and wrath. His shadow stretched far, commanding dark-tide spirits that twisted the waters and sowed discord among the islanders. As the god spoke, Mira sensed subtle shifts in the tides and skies. The sea's surface rippled unnaturally. Clouds gathered with an unnatural hush, their edges tinged with an ominous violet. These were no ordinary changes, but the stirring of power long dormant, awakening beneath her feet and beyond the horizon. Returning to her boat, Mira's mind raced with the weight of these revelations. She thought of Ellen, the elder seer who had shared whispers of ancient lore, a delicate balance between light and darkness that must be guarded at all costs. Betrayal that had exiled the gods was a wound still bleeding beneath the surface, and Daegis's growing influence threatened to rip it open wider. The islanders' growing fear was not unfounded. Rumors swirled like gathering storm clouds, dark spirits seen lurking near fishing boats, strange tempests that appeared without warning, and whispers of factions eager to exploit the gods, return for their own ends. Mira understood now that her role was more than a guide. She was a mediator between worlds, a bridge spanning past and present, light and shadow. That night, under a sky heavy with drifting lanterns, Mira sat with Ellen by the fire, their faces carved by flickering light. Ellen's voice was steady but filled with the weight of history as she spoke of the exile, the ancient conflicts, and the price of power unbalanced. "The seas do not forget," Ellen said softly, "nor do the gods who dwell within them." Mira's gaze drifted to the dark horizon, where the lantern islands floated like scattered stars. The sea's quiet song was changing, carrying with it a message she could not yet fully understand. But one truth was clear: the tides of old power were rising once more, and with them, the fragile peace of the lantern seas was at risk. She felt the stirrings of dread and awe intertwine within her, the call of the unknown, the burden of choice. Could she steer the course through this gathering storm? Could the light and darkness find balance again? The sea whispered answers she had yet to hear, and Mira's journey had only just begun. As dawn broke, painting the sky with streaks of rose and amber, Mira set her course homeward, the weight of ancient histories pressing upon her shoulders. Around her, the lantern seas drifted, beautiful, mysterious, and alive with magic. Somewhere in the depths, beneath the shifting tides and glowing lights, Daegis's shadow moved, gathering strength for the challenge to come. Her fingers tightened on the oars. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with peril and hope intertwined like the flickering flames of a lantern in the dark. But Mira was resolved to protect her home, to honor the gods' stories, and to face the darkness rising beneath the waves. She would be their guide, their guardian, and their light. The tides of old power were awakening, and so was she. The sea's breath caught in the silent dawn, and beyond the horizon, the glow of the lantern islands shimmered, a beacon for those willing to walk the path through drifting light and shadow. The sun dipped low behind the drifting lantern islands, casting long shadows across the jagged shore where Mira stood, the salty breeze tangling through her dark braid. Her gaze was fixed on the horizon, where the faint glow of distant lanterns shimmered like scattered stars. The air was heavy with a restless energy, one that had been growing steadily since her discovery of the imprisoned gods. Tonight, however, that energy had taken on a sharper edge, one that gnawed at the fragile peace of her home. "Mira," came a voice, low and rough as the sea itself. She turned to find Cal, the young warrior whose fierce loyalty to their island was rivaled only by his suspicion of the divine. His tanned skin was marked with scars from past skirmishes, and his eyes burned with a mixture of anger and fear. "We need to talk," he said, stepping closer, his voice barely above a whisper yet carrying the weight of a brewing storm. They moved away from the small crowd gathered by the docks, seeking the relative privacy of the rocky outcrop that jutted into the sea. Here the waves crashed with a steady rhythm, but beneath the surface, a subtle unrest stirred. "You are putting us all in danger," Cal accused, his gaze steady and unyielding. "Bringing those gods back into our world, do you even realize what that means? The old stories say they brought ruin before. Why should this time be any different?" Mira felt the familiar pang of doubt knotting in her chest. She had wrestled with these fears herself, the unknown tides pulling at her resolve. But she had also seen the gods light their sorrow, their pleas for guidance, and she could not turn away. "I'm not asking you to trust me blindly," she replied, her voice calm but firm. "But we can't let fear dictate our actions. The gods are here, whether we want them or not. We must find a way to live with them, or the seas will suffer for it." Cal's jaw tightened, but before he could answer, a new presence made itself known. The creak of wooden beams and the patter of boots announced the arrival of Thala, a scholar from a distant Lantern Island, known for his studies of ancient divinities and arcane lore. Clad in simple robes, his satchel heavy with worn tomes and scrolls, he greeted the gathering islanders with a nod, eyes sharp and observant. "I have traveled far," Thala began, "to understand the shifts in our seas and skies. The gods' return is not just legend. It is a force reshaping our world. I offer what knowledge I have, that we might face this tide together." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some hopeful, others wary. The delicate balance of the Lantern Islands was fracturing under the weight of whispers and fears. That night, as lanterns flickered against the creeping darkness, Mira walked the shores alone. The sea was restless, its surface broken by the sudden darting of strange creatures stirred from their depths. Above, the sky twisted with unfamiliar clouds, swirling in unnatural patterns that seemed to echo the turmoil below. She could feel the gods' presence in the shifting tides, in the restless murmurs of the wind. Their power was growing, a tide impossible to ignore. The next day, the island's elders gathered in the lantern-lit hall, a space carved from driftwood and stone, where the scent of salt and smoke mingled. Mira stood before them, flanked by Kale and Thala, her voice steady despite the weight of the room. "We cannot deny the changes around us," she said. "The gods are part of our world now. We must learn to live with them, to understand their needs and fears, as they must understand ours." A murmur of dissent rose, and Kale stepped forward, his voice carrying the raw edge of mistrust. "And what if they bring destruction? What if their return tears apart everything we hold dear?" Mira met his gaze, the sea's shifting hues reflecting in her eyes. "Then we face it together, because turning our backs now will only doom us to drift apart in darkness." As the meeting ended, the lingering uncertainty hung thick in the air, but so did a flicker of hope, a fragile light kindled by Mira's resolve. Yet, beneath the surface of their fragile unity, the storm was gathering. The gods' influence seeped into the tides and winds, an ancient power awakening that neither islander nor deity could fully control. Mira knew the path ahead would be fraught with peril, but she was determined to navigate it, for the sake of her people, and the drifting Lantern Islands she called home. She turned once more to the darkening horizon, where the lanterns glowed like distant beacons. Somewhere out there, the sea whispered secrets in the language of light and shadow, and Mira listened, ready to answer the call. But as the wind carried faint echoes of unrest, she felt the first warning tremors of a storm that would test the very balance of the Lantern seas. The night wrapped the island in a soft cloak of quiet, interrupted only by the gentle lapping of waves against the wooden pilings of Mira's small home. Inside, the flicker of a single lantern cast dancing shadows across the rough-hewn walls, painting the familiar space with an uncertain light. Mira sat cross-legged on the floor, her fingers absently tracing the coarse rope of a fishing net she'd mended that afternoon. The glow of the lantern reflected faintly in her eyes, which now mirrored the tumult of her thoughts more than the calm sea outside. Doubt was a persistent tide, pulling at her resolve with cold fingers. She had accepted the gods' plea to guide them, yet each step forward felt weighted by uncertainty. The ancient beings she'd encountered were were not just myths woven into bedtime stories. They were real, powerful, and fraught with complexities she barely understood. Could she, a simple fisherwoman, carry the burden of their fate alongside her own? The question gnawed at her, more insistent than the biting wind outside. A soft knock at the door drew her from her reverie. Mira slipped inside, her sun-bleached hair catching the lantern light as she smiled gently. "Still awake, Mira?" "Sleep is a stranger tonight," Mira admitted, moving aside to offer a place on the woven mat. Mira settled beside her, the quiet between them comfortable yet filled with unspoken worries. The islands seem restless. Even the lanterns flicker with unease. Mira nodded. "The balance feels fragile. I fear what might come if it breaks." "Then you must find your strength," Mira said softly. "Not just for the gods, but for all of us who call these drifting isles home." The words settled over Mira like a balm, but the uncertainty remained. She knew she needed guidance beyond her own heart's tumult, so the next morning, she sought out Ilan, the island's elder seer and keeper of ancient lore. Ilan awaited her beneath the canopy of lantern-lit trees, the soft glow weaving through leaves like scattered stars. Her silver hair flowed freely, catching the light in a way that made her seem almost ethereal. When Mira approached, Ellen's calm eyes held both welcome and the gravity of burdens too long carried alone. "Mira," Ellen began, her voice a gentle current, "the path you walk is not new. I, too, have known the weight of these gods and the tides they stir." Mira listened intently as Ilan unfolded a secret long held in the shadows, the elder's own youthful role in the exile of the gods. The confession was not one of pride but of regret, a painful acknowledgement of choices made in fear and misunderstanding. "We believed banishing them would bring peace," Ilan said, "but in doing so, we severed the balance. The light and darkness were never meant to be divided so harshly." The revelation deepened Mira's resolve but added layers to her doubts. If even the wise had faltered, how could she hope to succeed? Meanwhile, on the rocky shore beyond the village, Kale watched the gods perform a subtle healing ritual on injured islanders. The scene was quiet, yet profound, the ancient beings channeling light that warmed and mended flesh. Kale's gaze hardened, his skepticism wrestling with a reluctant admiration. "They are not the monsters we feared," he muttered to himself, though the scars on his face bore witness to battles fought in the name of survival and suspicion. His conflicted feelings rippled through the community, challenging long-held fears and stirring whispers of change. As dusk descended again, Mira found herself walking the beach with Nira, the distant lantern islands glowing softly against the darkening sky. The sea breathed its timeless lullaby, steady and unyielding. "Will the balance hold?" Mira asked quietly. Nira's gaze was steady. "It must. Because if it doesn't, we all drift into darkness." Mira's heart tightened with the weight of that truth. Her journey was only beginning, and the flickers of doubt within her were both a warning and a call to courage. The lanterns danced faintly in the twilight, neither fully bright nor swallowed by shadow, the perfect emblem of a world on the edge. And Mira, caught between fear and hope, knew she must become the light that would guide them through the gathering dusk. With the seas shifting beneath her feet and ancient powers awakening, the question remained: could she, a lone fisherwoman, become the beacon the lantern sees so desperately needed? The night deepened, and with it, the promise of change.